You with us today. We're very excited to have a large number of state and federal advocates with us who have come off of a very busy and somewhat triumphant for some. I'm looking at Matthew from Mexico week. So very privileged to have people with us. And we're going to jump right in. Our thought for today, actually, in case there are folks here who don't know me, I'm Shannon Rudisill. I'm the Executive Director of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative. And I want to acknowledge that we have with us today also members of the Economic Opportunity Funders Group. So we want to thank them for co-hosting with us today, which means that we have a great cross-section of different funders, both national and state, and a great cross-section of national and state advocates and organizers to talk about where we are and what comes next. So first we're going to hear from a trio of advocates kind of setting the stage for and reflecting on where we've been and where we're going. And then we will have some breakout groups because we did end up with quite a large response to this event. So we are going to hear from Fatima Gosgraves, the director of the National Women's Law Center, Sarah Rittling, the executive director of the First 5 Years Fund, and Andrea Peluso, co-director of the Child Care for Every Family Network. And after they speak, we will have time for some questions and answers, and then we will have time to go into smaller groups, so we'll have some interaction. So with that, thank you so much to our fantastic team of speakers for joining us, and I will turn it over to Fatima.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm so very glad to be with so many of you. And in some ways, I probably should have a very short part because I'm supposed to kick us off by describing the current electoral landscape. But of course, that's still in flux. But and for those of you who have not been glued to social media or TV, I will just tick through some highlights and say what I think that means. So as you know, we still have a couple of races that haven't been formally called. At the federal level, the control of the Senate is still not settled. There are a few things that we know. We know that there will be a runoff in Georgia on December 6th. And we also know that some of the other races that were close races have now been called. So Senator Johnson from Wisconsin, for example, will be returning. But they're the most optimistic of predictions, I think, put the Senate in a situation where it could be with a Georgia runoff that returns Senator Warnock, who has supported childcare, in a situation where it is 51, which would be an increase. But it also could be a situation where we are 50-50 plus a VP tiebreaker, which is where we have been in the Senate for the last 2 years. Or there is a more remote possibility that the Republicans could gain control of the Senate by a very narrow margin. In the House, it also has not yet been called. And, you know, probably the folks who are out there making projections that you have heard are suggesting that there's going to be a small majority for the Republicans. There are sort of outside possibilities that might leave it effectively tied, or the Democrats actually controlling the House. So the big thing is we don't know. And with states like California, who give a lot more time to receive mail-in ballots, we won't know for sure for a while. And so unfortunately for all of us, we are all still in a bit of planning in terms of scenarios. But even as you plan in scenarios, I think there are a few things to just keep in mind that I wanted to lift up today. The one is I want to just remind everyone, and you all know this, but that childcare has always been an issue that has been considered bipartisan. And in a situation where there are narrow majorities in either way, my view is that we should not count ourselves entirely out under any of the such scenarios that I have just articulated. The second thing, though, which might sound counter to what I just said, is that we are also operating in a context where childcare and really the crisis in our care infrastructure is being linked to other broader systems. And so it is very possible that there will be childcare fights that are linked to broader fights around taxes, childcare fights that are linked to broader fights around abortion, childcare fights that are in the context of how do you use and wield the broader control of the Senate and whether it functions. We also, I think, should have in mind that, and I know many of you are just probably tired of elections, but once this midterm election is finally done, the presidential basically starts. And what we know is that a couple of the candidates at least are going to be running on their framework of a parent agenda. And I will just say that parent agenda might include everything from investments in care, investments in childcare, investments in paid leave, including investments that actually don't match the policies that we are championing, but also making arguments and trying to frame a true parent agenda as an anti-abortion agenda, or an anti-trans and LGBTQ agenda, or controlling the things that that happens at school. So some of these fights that you have seen burst open, especially in school boards and in states, framing these as the parent agenda. I heard Governor Youngkin, an ad from Governor Youngkin the other day where, he started out from parents matter, and the way that people talk about Black Lives Matter, parents' lives matter, and then started articulating a framework. So I think we're going to see that. There's organizing that's happening among pretty conservative groups that are calling themselves parent choice groups. It's possible that childcare gets swung up into those fights in a number of ways. And then I also just want to remind us that there are two things that we just can't forget, because over the last couple of years, we have won big on care. We've won in historic investments. We've deepened our relationships and partnerships across coalitions. We've expanded the cultural understanding and demand across the field. And we are poised, I believe, for people to understand that childcare is the sort of thing that is on the top of the issues, and care broadly at the top of the issues that people should fight for and care about in this country. So we might see people running on it for president from the other way. And the network that we have been building is an opportunity for that idea to be grounded in a broader framework of racial and gender and economic justice. And so to some, lots of uncertainty, lots of reasons to be optimistic about some pathways ahead, but also some pitfalls that we may encounter over the next couple of years. And I will turn it over to my colleagues in the work.
Thank you. And you're turning it to Sarah Ritling. Thank you so much.
Great. Hi. Yes. And I obviously, for those of you who know our work, obviously agree with the bipartisan nature of the issue and see it as a tremendous opportunity in these slight margins and uncertainty, especially when we look at the president's overall agenda, birth through 5, particularly in the care and education space, and the fact that it was a comprehensive suite of proposals that, when knit together, addressed the tax code, addressed existing programs, addressed new things to the tune of what we saw not happen in reconciliation. And so the next 2 years, working with our partners, certainly on both sides of the aisle, and with the leadership of the president, and making good on some of those is an opportunity for sure, especially given the slight margins, regardless of who ends up in control of Congress. Those increases we've seen before have been in tight margins like this, and in mixed government. And so we have to keep on in that regard. We believe that also that if you look at the way that the landscape is shaping out, we have equal parts opportunity, equal parts concern, and really trying to build as much support as we can across the aisle. And I include across the aisle to be the middle of both parties. When we look at the upcoming presidential election, and to Tima's point, I would argue the presidential started Tuesday night in a big way. And really want to make sure that the issue remains a political one for both parties. And we've seen that play out to our benefit over the course of the past 2 years. And I think the big issue is just keeping it from being one that's politicized. There are very few issues left out there anymore for people to come to agreement on. The president said he's going to call a bipartisan group of members to the White House to talk about what's next. And I think, obviously we're the sleeper on that one. And not only are we a sleeper, but we had elected officials in leadership say they still need to make good on what they said they needed to do to address 2 really simple issues. I mean, our issues are not complicated when you think about care. There's not enough of it and people can't afford it. And so you have nowhere to go but up. When you think about the possibility of solutions coming down the pike. We've all been here before, and I think it's nice to have the midterms behind us so we can go back to work. And I would just make one last plug that this really isn't just a next 2 year or into the next 4 years, but certainly the next couple of weeks and months in making sure that the window of opportunity that exists now in terms of year-end actions there's a reminder that we need to leverage that. So that's my spiel. And I believe I'm turning it over to Andrea.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, so much. Andrea Peluso, her. I'm a co-director with Erica Gallegos, who's also here of the Child Care for Every Family Network. And just to kind of add to what has already been said over the last couple of years, we have built a lot of power for childcare and for a really bold and transformational vision for what it is that we need from a childcare system. And we have organized a lot of people across the country around this transformational vision for childcare with all of the partners and folks on the call and out there in the field. And at the network, we have a goal to really bring together more of our state and national partners together with our parent and provider leaders to really start to shape some near-term campaign goals and strategies that we can advance together in the near term and over the next couple of years that'll move us toward that long-term vision for the system that we really need. So any campaigners on the line today know that you organize out of a win and you organize out of a loss. And we have done, but we've won and we've lost over the last year. So we've had historic investments through COVID aid that really have allowed for a lot of our state partners and field partners to mobilize around some really key wins and some really key investments in systems transformations over the last 2 years. And we have some work to do to continue those wins and to continue to fund the things that have been won in the field. And we've also seen some historic wins on the ballot, like in New Mexico. Please applaud the folks in New Mexico who've won this historic ballot victory. And you're going to hear more about that in one of our small groups. We also have lost in reconciliation and had, not had the long-term investments made in childcare at the federal level that we need. And we need to build a set of campaign strategies to come back and make that demand again and win the federal funding that we need to really fund the system comprehensively across the country. So our field is as worked up as ever. There is no lack of energy among parents and providers around solving for this crisis. So we're going to be working with a number of partners to convene later in the month to really think through a set of campaign strategies that we'll be driving toward over the next couple of years to win more sustained investment in that transformed childcare system. We're going to need to do a lot to develop greater capacity to support state-based organizing and campaign work on the ground that is really focused on building power with parents and providers to win these transformational demands, to implement them equitably, to hold those systems accountable to making sure that parents and providers are getting what we've won. And that state work and the work that's happening at the federal level is mutually reinforcing, right? Like it's connected. The power that we're building on the ground and for our national work is very complementary, and we'll be working in that direction. And then we need to grow these really robust state campaigns and national campaigns that are really focused on advancing our narrative goals, advancing our organizing goals, supporting what we're doing with research, and advancing some of our key policy priorities and principles. So there's no shortage of work to be done. Everyone is important. Everyone is needed. We need all that we've had so far and so much more. And we're really excited to get to work. And with that, I'll pass it back to Shannon.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the energy and also the crispness. So we do have time for some questions. I will take moderator's privilege and ask the first one, which gives people time because I don't think anybody put one in the chat. I will say part of the reason we did this also is you can use the raise hand feature and you'll zoom up to the top of the list, which will help us allow you guys to unmute and ask your own question. But a question I will ask is based on one that got submitted, but the person who submitted it, I do not believe is here. I noticed that Fatima brought up the bipartisan nature of these issues. And I think Sarah said we need to keep this a political issue. Okay, so I think this raises something that I want to call out because I struggle with it. I think a lot of people struggle with it when we start talking about like, but it's bipartisan, but everything seems so hot. If it becomes political, isn't it partisan? So like, could you guys just speak a little bit to that?
Can I clarify? Because I don't know that Sarah and I were saying necessarily the same thing,
Okay.
although Sarah will correct me, I'm sure. But I actually think it's both. I think is issue that if we're doing our job right, there's a sense that it is a politically powerful issue. And by that, I mean people who are elected officials see it as a good thing, a popular thing, a winning thing to be in favor and supporting and driving a child care agenda. And that might be people in both parties. So that's one thing. But second, there is a history that we can draw upon in sort of an insight strategy of being able to remind people that you know how to do this. You know how to show up around child care investments. You've done it, and we can point to, you've done it when the Congress looked like this, and you've done it when the Congress looked like that, and when so-and-so is president. So there's an ability to do that. And then the last thing that I was trying to point out that I do think we just need to be clear about is that childcare is enormously popular, and the care crisis families are facing and parents are dealing with, it's super real. And that there are those who I would put in an extremist box. I would not paint them as like partisan or not, or right or left. I just say they're extreme, that are trying to capitalize on that real pain to drive a totally different agenda, to drive an anti-abortion agenda, to drive an anti-trans agenda. And so I guess I'm just trying to point out that it's complicated because of all of that.
Well, I'm not going to correct you because I don't, I wasn't contrary to that. And I like to work in examples on this a little bit, Shannon. So first of all, by bipartisan for us, it doesn't mean you only work on things where you have a Republican and a Democrat. It means that you're looking to make progress regardless of who's in control, right? So for example, when you have the president of the United States of America prioritizing an issue and putting it onto a rather political legislative vehicle, which both sides use, you take advantage of that and do everything you can to make it become a reality, but you don't use it against Republicans for not being for it. You then go to the Republicans and say, you have no lack of options to go and tell the president he's wrong or tell the Democrats they're wrong, but you need to leave this issue alone because parents and families and providers need it. They're in your district And you have as much responsibility to make right by it as the president of the United States. So go find another issue to politicize and use against your political opponent. By having the issue be political, though, we have the ability to use it for, if it wasn't political going into the last presidential election, we wouldn't have had the opportunity we just had. And we, for a long, long time, had tried to be like, oh, you know, we're just kind of here. We're really nice people. We're under the radar. It'd be great if you could give us some, you know, some money to help out families and kids. And the president took it to a whole new level.
Yeah, and they have to implement it
so
no matter what.
That's a little bit of amplification on that.
Yeah, and I
And
would
then
just
the only
add-
other thing that I just want to name on that is that everyone also plays a different role, right? Like across our ecosystem, there are organizations that are really well suited to go into a particular office and have one stance, and other organizations who are better suited to have a little bit harder edge. And what's really powerful, I think, is when the range of organizations, no matter your strategy, when you can be deeply connected, whether you're playing whatever role you're playing in the ecosystem.
I totally agree, Fatima. And I would just add too that like this again comes back to like why it's so important to have grassroots power, because truly people are going to vote for the thing that there is a demand for them to vote for. And we are going to be focused on building greater demand for a greater transformation and investment. And I think we'll find the votes because there's this robust demand.